Hey everybody, I'm here with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Richard Johnson. I'm excited to have him. We're going to talk everything sugar and fructose. So,
Yeah.
I heard that fructose is good for you. Is this true?
If you're starving,
Over
in general, you want to avoid eating a lot of fructose. That's for sure.
93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy now. So, really, let's talk about in a serious light sugar, fructose, and its role in longevity, since longevity is the incisive conversation of 2024.
Sounds great. So, thank you for inviting me to your show. I guess what we should do first is just define what fructose is, because not everyone knows. Fructose is a carbohydrate, and it is a sugar, and it's named fructose, or some people call it fructose, is derived from the fact that it's associated with fruit. And of course, we think of fruit as healthy, but fructose is the sugar that's present in most fruits and in honey. So right away, most people would tend to favor foods that contain fructose, because we view these foods often as being healthy. But fructose is also the major component of table sugar, or
Wow.
sucrose, and it's also the major component of high fructose corn syrup. And table sugar and high fructose corn syrup are added sugars that are added to foods to make them taste sweet, and they are pervasive. We are eating as much as 1/6 of our diet comes from these sugars. And so high fructose corn syrup is present in processed foods. They're added to yogurts, they're added to crackers, it's added to so many foods. Soft drinks are the biggest culprit. And table sugar, as you know, is also added to a ton of foods. And so there's a lot of these sugars that we're exposed to, and the vast majority of the fructose we eat comes from these two sugars. It doesn't come from fruit. Now, if you drink a lot of fruit juice, you can get a lot of fructose. If you're eating honey at every meal, you can get a lot of fructose from those sources too. Now, the other way you can get fructose is from carbs, and we can make fructose in our body. So right off the bat, let's just let everyone know that it isn't just the fructose we eat, but we also make fructose, and that fructose is made in the brain, it's made in the liver, it's made in different tissues in response to high glucose levels. So when we eat, if you're diabetic, for example, and diabetes is a disease due to high blood glucose, you're making fructose from that high blood glucose. Likewise, when you eat a high glycemic carb diet, things like potatoes, rice, French fries, crackers, cereal, bread, these things have a lot of starch, and starch is broken down to glucose. And after you eat a starchy meal, your glucose levels go up in your blood. And if they get too high, they start to make fructose. So you can get, basically, fructose comes from carbs, and the main source is sugar and high fructose corn syrup. And the second major source is like bread, rice, and potatoes. And that reaction to make fructose is sped up by the presence of salt. So salted French fries or salted pretzels will make more fructose than unsalted fries. And so that's the beginning of the definition of what is fructose.
So, is it fair to say that virtually all carbohydrates, if consumed in large amounts, end up in the byproduct of fructose?
Not all. So
Okay.
some foods don't generate enough blood glucose to trigger the conversion. So like if you're eating broccoli, for example, I don't think you're going to make much fructose. And part of it is, it's sort of interesting. The way fructose works and is in the way it's made is it's really related to the glucose level. So if there's a lot of fiber that you're eating and that slows the absorption of glucose, your blood glucose may not go up. So if I eat a piece of bread by itself, the glucose goes up pretty quickly in my blood. But if I put, avocado on it or something that will slow the absorption of the bread, and then the glucose won't go up as high and you won't make as much fructose. And so it is a little bit variable. And, high fiber foods, lettuce and celery and all these kinds of vegetables really don't generate much fructose at all.
So we know the average American consumes about 160 pounds of sugar per year, give or take. Also, the average American consumes 63% of their calories from ultra-processed foods.
Yes.
Now we hear that fructose is a problem. And the typical response I get from patients is, does that mean I can't eat fruits?
Yeah, no. So the way it works, it's really a little bit complicated, but natural fruits contain fructose, right? So fructose is bad no matter how you get it. However, when you eat a natural fruit, fructose is the same no matter where it is, okay? But when you eat a natural fruit, there are other things in the fruit that can protect you. So, for example, vitamin C will block how fructose works, at least partially. And vitamin C is high in a lot of fruits like kiwi. Kiwi is a great fruit, very high in vitamin C, kind of low in fructose. And the vitamin C neutralizes the fructose. Epicatechin or epigallocatechin, these are flavonols. Some of them are present in fruits. They can help block potassium and fiber, slow the absorption of the fructose. The way the fructose works is, it's kind of important to understand that the way it works is fructose gets metabolized in the liver. And when it's metabolized in the liver, that is how it triggers a switch that makes you want to eat more, makes you hungry, and basically triggers a switch to make you insulin resistant and everything like that. So it's a biologic mechanism that involves the metabolism of fructose in the liver. And so it's really it isn't just how much fructose you eat, it's how much gets to the liver and what the concentration it is that the liver sees. So if the liver sees a high concentration of fructose, it will activate it. The switch will be activated to a stronger degree than if the fructose trickles in. So like if I drink a soft drink that's filled with fructose and I drink it really fast, I'm getting a large dose of fructose and it's being absorbed rapidly. And so that combination of rapid absorption and large amount leads to a big concentration of fructose in the liver and a big activation of the switch. However, if I drank the fructose, the soft drink, and just sipped it over a 6-hour period, the amount of fructose being absorbed would be a little bit, but it would be a lot over 12 hours, but it would be a very little bit per minute. And I might not get the sufficient concentration to activate the switch, in which case it would kind of just be a calorie. So the way the fructose works is when it's metabolized in the liver, you have to have kind of a high concentration to activate this switch that makes you want to become fat. And that's why soft drinks and foods that are very high in fructose are so dangerous. However, when you eat a natural fruit and it only has 3 or 4 grams of fructose, part of that gets metabolized in the intestine and never actually gets to the liver. And there's a guy at Princeton who has shown that maybe 3 or 4 grams of fructose gets inactivated in the intestine. So if you eat an orange that has 6 grams of fructose, probably half of that is inactivated in the intestine, and you're only delivering 3 grams or so to the liver, and it's coming with vitamin C and other things that kind of neutralize it. But if you drink a soft drink and you get 30 grams of fructose and you drink it fast, it's a huge difference. So natural fruits turn out to be pretty healthy. They're healthy. They reduce the risk of heart disease and problems like that because of the ingredients they contain, the flavonols, the potassium. And we've actually done studies where we've given fructose to animals with vitamin C or with flavonols or potassium. And so we can actually show that we can neutralize some of the effects of fructose this way. Now, when you drink fruit juice and you put 6 fruit in a container, blend it, and now you have like 20 grams of fructose, plus you've kind of removed some of the pulp and fiber, then you're going to get into trouble, right? And animals in the wild, they do use fruit to increase their weight, but they eat tons of fruit. So like if a bear is preparing for hibernation and they eat fruit to activate this switch to make them fat, they're eating, thousands of grapes in a couple of days. And it's different from what we're doing.
It's not the fructose from fruit, it's the concentration of fructose that actually activates the biological switch to gain weight. Well, it's called fructose the fat switch.
Yes. It's the concentration. And so if you ate the fructose extremely slow, it would just be the calories. But to activate the switch, it's the concentration. And I probably should talk a little bit about how the switch is activated so that people understand that.
Go for it. Open it up. Because you have to understand that, you broke people's heart. Everybody loves fruit because everybody.
Yeah, but I don't want to break your heart. Eat the fruit. I eat fruit every day. And it's a good way to help quench. If you have a craving for sweetness, it is one way to help to quench that. I don't eat 5 fruit at a time. I don't get a bowl of grapes.
That's what I wanted to get to. So you're eating a fruit at a time.
Yeah.
You're not eating 3 fruits at a time.
Right.
Eating a choice fruit, let's say an apple, like you said, a little lower glycemic index with a lot of soluble and insoluble fiber, blueberries, blackberries, and the like. You're not eating.
Berries are great.
Okay.
Yeah, you can eat more than one berry, okay? Like you can eat a half a cup of berries or a cup of berries. Berries in particular have so many good things like blueberries, raspberries, strawberries. They're just wonderful fruits. We mentioned kiwi already. The ones that are the sweetest tend to be like plums and pears, figs. Figs are pretty dangerous, figs and dates, because they contain so much fructose. But anyway.
You wanted to tell us why fructose is the sneaky carb in the whole chemical pathway of it.
Yeah. So the way that the switch is activated is a tricky thing. Everyone was thinking that the way we get obese is you eat calories. Calories are used to make energy. And there's active energy, which we call ATP, and there's stored energy, which is basically fat. And simplistically, the thinking was, well, when you eat, you fill up the gas tank with the ATP, and you get all that made. And then if there's extra and you ate it, it'll be stored as fat. And then when you're burning your energy, you're burning the ATP, and if you get the ATP levels go low, then the fat is broken down to release the ATP to keep our energy going. And therefore, that's why fasting can allow you to lose weight or lose fat, because the fat is burned preferentially to provide the calories you don't get from food. And that's why animals become fat before they hibernate, because they start storing the fat, because when they're hibernating, they don't have food. So they'll break down the fat to make the ATP. So you get your ATP either from fat or from the calories. And of course, most animals don't want to be fat, so they eat every day to get their calories. But they always store a little fat just in case they need it to make if there's no food around. Okay, but the way fructose works, it's so clever. It lowers the ATP directly. It's a calorie that actually reduces the active energy in a cell. And it does that through a variety of mechanisms. It's actually a complicated biochemistry course to really learn how it does it. But the bottom line is it ends up, the major effect appears to be by blocking the production of ATP by the mitochondria. So we have these little factories that make the ATP, and most of the ATP comes from these factories. Not all of it, but most of it comes from these factories, and they're called mitochondria. And the way fructose works is when it's metabolized, it blocks the production of ATP. It slows the production from the mitochondria. It reduces it by maybe a third. It doesn't take it to zero. It just reduces it. And so when there's less ATP being produced, the energy that you were eating gets turned into fat because it's not being used to make active energy. So it kind of shunts the energy into fat. And there's also this block going on. Fructose blocks the ability of the fat to break down to replace the low ATP. So you end up, at least for a while, with a low ATP state. And it's not super low. It's like 25% decreased, but it's like a warning. And it's a warning to the organism or to the person to say, hey, you know what? I feel like my energy is a little bit low. I need to eat. I need to look for food. I'm hungry. And it stimulates you to eat food, even though you don't really need to eat food, because overall, this is a trick. They lowered your ATP and you still have fat, but they lower it so that you eat more. So it's like a trick to the animal to make it think that it needs more food when it actually has normal fat or even increased fat. And so what happens is the animal eats more and you become fat. And it's all done as a mechanism to help the animal prepare for a time when food's not available in the future. So like in the fall, when there's still food around, the bear will start eating more. It'll start eating these berries. It will activate the switch. And even though it itself doesn't, there's plenty of food around, it wants to store fat for the future. And so this is the way it works. And so it lowers the ATP, making the animal thinks that there's no food around, but there still is food around. And so they eat and eat and eat, and the weight goes up and the fat goes up, and they become insulin resistant, and they've disconnected their normal weight regulation. Normally, an animal wants to maintain a weight just the way it is, but this affects that. So our problem is we're eating all this sugar that has, it's around all the time. The grocery stores are full. And so we're activating this biologic switch kind of on a chronic basis, but we're not preparing for a time when there's no food, because there's always food. And so there's no hibernation. We just keep eating. And then over time, this normally when you eat fructose, it's a temporary thing. It does this only for a while, and then you recover, right? But if you're now eating sugar all the time, what happens is you're activating the switch all the time. And what's more, these mitochondria, the way we suppress the production is to cause stress to the mitochondria. We call it oxidative stress. And over time, that damages the mitochondria. So then the mitochondria start getting damaged. And that is really what aging's about, because now we can't produce the energy even when we're not eating sugar or not making sugar. And so, and then everything starts to decrease. Our muscle mass, we can't maintain our muscle. Our brain starts to fail a little bit, and we're basically aging.
Wow, there's a lot to unbox there. To recap, fructose ingestion dampens production of ATP.
Right.
Increases production of stored fat. Will suppress mitochondrial function. Will actually lead to us to store more calories than we burn. More oxidative stress. I've heard you say before in other podcasts, fall in energy, lower ATP in the cell, body doesn't have enough energy, causes you to eat more, that vicious cycle. ATP production decreases by about 30%. I think you said no other nutrient drops ATP to that level.
Right.
Energy balance is maintained but converts from burn to stored energy. And now I'm going to set you up. I know Dr. David Perlmutter wrote a book called Drop Acid, and he said that he thought about uric acid because you talked about fructose metabolism producing uric acid, which was a byproduct of energy depletion, i.e., what we're talking about right now.
You got it. So exactly. So our big question that we asked, and actually the way we discovered this was, we found that the ATP levels were falling, and we didn't really understand why. And then we figured out that it was due to a substance called uric acid. And uric acid is a breakdown product of ATP, actually. But it is the thing that suppresses the mitochondria from making ATP. And it does it indirectly. The way it works is it stimulates another enzyme that makes oxidants. Oxidants are bad guys, basically. And it stimulates that enzyme that it actually has a role in moving that enzyme into the mitochondria. And that produces the oxidants and causes it. But uric acid turned out to be the culprit. Now, I subsequently became an expert on uric acid, and David Perlmutter is also an expert, and we are good friends, and his book, Drop Acid, is really about uric acid. I also have a book, Nature Wants Us to Be Fat, that also talks a lot about uric acid, but uric acid is the active player that's driving most of this. And uric acid is a substance that a lot of people know about because it's common in a disease called gout. And gout is this arthritis that affects mainly men, but women as well, and is associated with being overweight. People who are obese or diabetic, this is like the greatest risk factor for developing gout. And interestingly, fructose raises uric acid, both in the blood as well as inside the cell. And other foods that raise uric acid are all associated with the development of obesity. And our work suggests that the uric acid is actually playing a role in the obesity by having a role in suppressing the ATP production. And so in gout, it's not from the ATP depletion, but rather in gout, the uric acid builds up so high that it starts to crystallize in the blood and it can crystallize into the joints. And the classic joint is the big toe. And it's got it presents with a big red hot toe. It's hard to walk. And that's an arthritis from high uric acid. And, you can treat it with anti-inflammatories. But a lot of people have to have their uric acid lowered by either a diet or other means like drugs. But anyway, so gout is a problem that's seen very commonly in people with obesity, and it's linked with obesity through the fact that, fructose drives up uric acid and fructose drives obesity. So it's part of that story. And so it's very interesting. If you look at people at uric acid levels vary widely in people, and you should probably get it measured. And people who have low uric acid levels, like 3 or 4 milligrams per deciliter, these are blood levels. They have a very low chance of developing obesity or diabetes, high blood pressure. They're protected from heart disease. They're protected from dementia. If you have a blood uric acid level of 3 or 4, that's a very, very good thing. But if you have a blood uric acid level of over 7, your risk is not just for gout, but you have an increased risk for obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and other diseases, including dementia. Interestingly, though, as if a person does develop dementia, they often will reduce their food intake. It's associated with losing weight. People aren't taking good care of themselves, and when you're not eating well, ironically, the uric acid level starts to fall. So at a time when a person's really has dementia, oftentimes their uric acid levels are now normal or even on the low side, but they're also losing weight and not doing well.
Lots of good stuff to get in there on. All right, so uric acid, the leading cause for gout, not purines, but uric acid for gout, correct?
So uric acid is the cause of gout, and you can raise uric acid three different ways. One, by sugar and high fructose corn syrup. In other words, fructose. Fructose raises uric acid very powerfully, and it does so within minutes of eating it. A second way is by eating purines. Purines are nitrogen containing compounds that are in foods. They're in plants, they're in meats, but they're particularly present when there's a lot of cellular material like yeast. Yeast has very high in purines, and yeast is used to make beer, brewer's yeast. And beer has probably some of the highest purine content of any food. And beer is associated with gout. It's also associated with obesity and diabetes. The beer got worse with beer, for example, than like wine, that you have that risk. And I know this is going to disappoint many of you out there because a lot of people like beer, but it really does increase your risk for obesity and all the problems with alcohol as well. So anyway, and then the third thing that raises uric acid is alcohol. So pure alcohol does raise uric acid to some degree as well. And it also can cause some depletion of ATP. And so alcohol, purines, and sugar all raise uric acid, and all three can have a role in activating the switch. And so it's not all from fructose. You can activate the switch by eating foods very rich in purines. But it's sort of interesting. The uric acid has two ways it works. One is it suppresses the mitochondria, which lowers the ATP and activates the switch. But a lot of the uric acid acts as an amplifier to activate this conversion of glucose to fructose. So the production of fructose in the body is also dependent on uric acid. And interestingly, if you're on a low-carb diet, you're pretty much protected from activating the switch. And that's because the switch is activated by fructose that we either eat or fructose we make. And when you're on a low-carb diet, a high uric acid isn't as dangerous as it would be if you're not. Because the high carb diet, when you're on a low carb diet, you don't have the fructose to really drive the switch. But uric acid is part of driving that switch. So when you're on a high carb diet, eating purines and alcohol really add to the fire because you got the fructose and you're making more uric acid and they're working together. But if you're on a very low carb diet and you don't have the fructose around, the uric acid is much less effective at suppressing the mitochondria. I'm sorry, I know that was confusing.
No, there was clarity there without question. So concentrated forms of fructose is the nexus for a lot of our conditions in the modern day.
Yes.
So so it's also been stated that an elevation in fructose can be the leading cause for non-alcoholic fatty liver. But fructose doesn't go to the liver right away. Doesn't it go to the gut first and then the liver? And that's why they call it a sneaky carb?
Yes, it goes to the gut first, but probably 70% of the fructose we eat ends up in the liver. So even though it goes through the intestine to get to the carbs, the intestine only removes about 4 or 5 grams. And most of the fructose we eat and almost all the fructose, a lot of the fructose we make is made in the liver. And also, by the way, in the brain. That's unfortunate, but that's also true. But anyway, the liver is the kingpin where the fructose affects dry fatty liver. I'll tell you it's sort of a cute story there. I was aware from when I was at the University of Florida that giving sugar to animals was a very easy way to create fatty liver And there were people who had already reported that if you feed fructose to mice, they get really, really fatty liver. And so there was this, when I was in Florida this is around 2004, there was a young physician who was studying this new disease called non-alcoholic fatty liver. And this disease really wasn't around until like the late 1980s and early 1990s. And no one really knew what the cause was. But the trouble is that this fatty liver could progress and cause inflammation and then liver failure. And it was rapidly becoming one of the most common causes of liver disease, but no one really knew what the cause was. So she was presenting her data, and I was aware that sugar could cause fatty liver. So I asked her if anyone really had studied that, and no one had done it yet. So I asked her if she could give us the liver biopsies of her patients, and working in collaboration with her, we found that there was dramatic evidence that fructose was being metabolized in the liver of these patients. And then she went on to an illustrious career where she showed that non-alcoholic fatty liver disease was really linked with sugar and high fructose corn syrup intake and high uric acid. Uric acid was part of it. And she even they did studies where they gave fructose to people, and they could show that it could cause this ATP depletion in the livers, and that it was correlated with, high uric acid. She did the whole bit. And she basically, Manal Abdul Malik, proved that high fructose corn syrup was the primary cause of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And those early papers were, now there's like over 700 papers on the subject. And it is for sure the major cause of fatty liver. So if any of you have fatty liver, and it's not from alcohol, so it's non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, the principal cause is sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and really watch those foods and cut back on carbs, because the high glycemic carbs like rice, potatoes, they can be converted to fructose in the liver.
Yeah, you just led me to a great question. The rice and the grains, foods that I try and limit. I wanted to ask you about the polyol pathway, but I'm a little scared without a chalkboard to do that. So what I will ask is, sugars are better yet, fructose effect, not fat, on raising your cholesterol markers.
Oh, that's a really good question. So when you give fructose to an animal or to a human, the predominant finding is a rise in triglycerides in the blood and in the liver. And triglycerides are fats, right? They are fats. But with cholesterol, we see a very classically a drop in the good cholesterol. The HDL cholesterol falls. And the LDL is variable depending upon the study. However, we have found that LDL often does go up with fructose. So there is an absolute effect on fat, and fatty liver is absolutely the super common when you eat or make a lot of fructose. And just to briefly, when you make fructose, there's only one way you can make it. You make it from glucose or from carbs. And that method of making it is called the polyol pathway. And it's stimulated by salt, and it's stimulated by uric acid. It's stimulated by stress. And so there's a number of things that stimulate that enzymatic pathway. The number one thing, though, is a high glucose diet. So if you're eating a lot of carbs, you are probably making fructose. And so we are eating too much carbs for sure. And we did this, the high carb diet, this production of fructose is probably key to aging. So there were studies done where they took fruit flies, and fruit flies can eat fruit, and they get some fructose from eating fruit. But remember, it's not so concentrated. But if you give a fruit fly a soft drink, they die young, and they can actually show that the fruit flies are putting on fat, becoming insulin resistant. It's unbelievable. But fructose is playing a role in aging. Fructose is playing a role in obesity. So here's a really, I rarely tell this story, but everybody's eating, the classic diet is like 50% carbohydrate diet. Most people are eating half of their food is carbohydrates. And that's what we consider normal, right? That's considered normal. But the low carb people will argue, that's way too much carbs. And I agree with them. And here's the evidence. If you take a mouse, we give the mouse food, we buy chow, and that mouse chow is also 50% carbohydrate. 55%. Okay. You can buy mouse chow that does not have a lot of sugar in it. Okay. And in fact, we bought some that has almost no fructose in it, no sugar in it, but it's just carbohydrate. Well, when we give those to mice over a couple, as they age, they start losing their mitochondria. They develop kidney disease. They develop high blood pressure. They become a little fat. They start to age, without being given sugar. So you might say, okay, Rick, you said sugar was bad, but here are these guys. But you know what? If we block fructose metabolism in mice not being given fructose, just a high carb diet, we block the aging process in them. Mitochondria stay healthy, they stay lean, they stay active. They don't get aging associated kidney disease. They don't get aging changes in their heart. I mean, I'm sure they will still age over time, but we really slow the process. And the only way what that means is that high carb diet was enough to still produce small amount of chronic low levels of fructose were being produced. And that tells me that if we want to cut back, if we want to have an impact on aging, we probably need to reduce our carbs. 50% is too much. We need to cut it back. We probably should be 40% or 35%, or maybe we need to, figure out how to counter, eat 40%, but eat foods that counter fructose effects, like, vitamin C. I mentioned that 500 milligrams a day, a gram a day can absolutely block some of the fructose effects. Exercise, keeping those mitochondria healthy by exercising helps to reduce the fructose effect. Cutting back on salt, because salt is used to convert, it activates the enzymes that help convert glucose to fructose. That would be beneficial. Drinking a lot of water, that for sure is beneficial. We haven't really gone into that, but it's definitely beneficial.
You're right. We haven't talked about hydration, dehydration, but
Yeah.
you got to have a longevity hack here. Muscle mass is the longevity organ. I personally believe it's the muscle to fat ratio, which is the key longevity marker. However,
Yep.
you said something way back that I want to bring back in, and you said fructose decreases muscle mass. So this whole
Yes.
idea of me going to the gym, if my
Yep.
diet sucks and it's
Yep.
fructose laden, it ain't happening.
Yeah. So it turns out that fructose causes insulin resistance. And we found that insulin resistance causes muscle wasting. And if in animals, if we correct the insulin resistance, we can protect the animals from muscle wasting. And we also could show that muscle wasting is also a low ATP state in the muscle. And, obviously by, things like creatine supplements and things like that are actually good at helping to maintain energy levels in the muscle, because creatine phosphate is another source of energy. And so it turns out that people who develop metabolic syndrome, when you're obese, the weight does have a tendency to try to force your muscles to be working a little bit to carry the weight. But relative to what it should be, there's the metabolic syndrome and insulin resistance actually causes muscle wasting. And as an animal ages, you'll see the muscle wasting become a real central problem. And we just published a paper where we reversed muscle wasting. We can block muscle wasting, for example, in kidney failure, by maintaining insulin sensitivity and maintaining ATP levels in the muscle. So it is, losing muscle is part of the aging process, and it's part of this mitochondrial problem where you're not making enough ATP. And fructose and uric acid, these are the players that are really have a role in knocking that ATP production down. So all these things to help prevent fatty liver are going to help maintain your muscle mass, are going to help you live longer and staying hydrated. Coffee, interesting. Coffee has a substance that helps block uric acid production. Heavy coffee drinkers have a much lower frequency of diabetes, a lower frequency of gout. And, you know, I think it's healthy. Now, coffee can irritate people's stomachs, and, you know, not everyone can tolerates coffee. But the effect of coffee to raise blood pressure goes away in chronic coffee drinkers. So, you know, it's seen with people who drink 1 cup every 3 months. But if you drink a cup of coffee a day, you don't have to worry about its blood pressure effects.
So organic coffee, of course,
Yeah.
is a great choice for longevity. Can have a positive effect on blood sugar.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Now, I know you want to cover and coffee is a great segue to it, hydration, dehydration, and its effect on fructose. I would have never thought that water intake has an effect on fructose production.
Well, I'm going to kind of talk about this in a reverse way just now, just for the sake. So it's been known for a very long time that people who are obese tend not to drink a lot of water. And it's also been known for a very long time that they tend to eat a lot of salt, and processed foods are filled with not only sugar, but with salt. And so this has been something that's been known. And about 15 years ago, a group of scientists discovered that there is this hormone called vasopressin, which is a hormone involved in water metabolism. And it is high in people with obesity. There's a blood test called copeptin. It's not done very often in the doctor's office, but it measures vasopressin. And this test is routinely elevated if you're overweight. It's routinely elevated if you have heart disease. It's routinely elevated if you have kidney disease. It's routinely elevated in all of these metabolic diseases. And if it's elevated and you're normal and thin, it predicts that you're going to develop these diseases. Sort of like uric acid. A high uric acid predicts, even in a young, healthy person, that they may get into trouble farther down the road. So no one knew why this hormone that's involved in water is elevated in people with obesity. But we do know that this hormone goes up when people are dehydrated. And this hormone goes up when you eat salt. And people who are obese tend to eat salt and be dehydrated. That's the first observation. Now, the second observation came from, studies in animals in which it became clear that fat had another role besides producing ATP. So when a bear hibernates, the fat in the bear is used to produce the ATP the bear needs during the winter. But the bear is not drinking any water either. So where does it get its water when it's sleeping in hibernating state? Well, when the fat is broken down, the fat produces water. And so fat becomes a source of water. And that's why camels have humps that are filled with fat that can break down to produce water when it absolutely needs it. That's why desert mammals often, desert rats, and they'll have a very fat tail because the tail can hold the fat that can be used to produce water. And they don't want to have it on their body because it will overheat them. But on the tail, it's fine. So these kinds of things, or whales have fat because they don't drink seawater. So they get 1/3 of their water, fresh water, from the fat, and about 2/3 from the food they eat. So fat becomes a source of water. And so when an animal eats salt, remember I told you that salt stimulates the production of fructose because it activates that enzyme that converts glucose to fructose. Well, when you eat salt, it makes you feel dehydrated even though you haven't lost water. So it makes you thirsty. You haven't lost water. It's just that you've eaten this salt and the salt concentration goes up in your blood. and that makes you want to drink water. And that's associated with the release of vasopressin. So this hormone goes up, and then the hormone helps you retain water by reducing the amount of water you pee. So it concentrates the urine. So the urine, you urinate less, but you get rid of the things you need by concentrating the urine. So vasopressin is there to help you hold on to water. So the big breakthrough came with the discovery that one of the ways vasopressin works is to stimulate fat, because that's another way to hold on to water. So when an animal's in the desert and they often have a high vasopressin level, that's to help them to make fat as another means to store water, because when they break down the fat, they can produce the water. Now, if you get really dehydrated, you're not going to be storing fat, you're going to be breaking down fat. But we don't want to become dehydrated to break down our fat, because you're sick when you're dehydrated. So the best way is to turn off the vasopressin. And the way to turn off the vasopressin is to drink water. So if you get just like if you're eating salt and you're thirsty, you're beginning to activate the switch, but you can block that by drinking water. So it turns out that drinking like 8 glasses of water a day is healthy. So we did these studies where we gave salt and sugar to animals and they become fat. And if we give them water, we can block the obesity. We can block the diabetes. So hydration is a good thing. I used to think, well, drinking water, our kidneys do the work for us. Why do I need to drink water? But it's absolutely true that when you get mildly dehydrated and you stimulate vasopressin, the vasopressin is acting to help you make fat. So you don't want to be dehydrated. You want to be well hydrated, and that will keep you healthy. Now, after our work on this, the National Institute of Health and the scientists there, especially in the aging field, started discovering that that people who are mildly dehydrated are not just at risk for obesity, but they're at risk for aging. They're at risk for dementia. They're at risk for all these metabolic diseases. And what they found, which was unbelievable, is that even people who appear to be well hydrated, but just subtly, you can show that subtly they're mildly dehydrated based on their blood tests, that they're at risk. So for years, we have called a normal serum sodium to be a range from like 137 to 143 or 144. And whenever you get a blood test, we get a sodium and a potassium, and the doctors never look at the sodium if they're normal, and they're normal 95% of the time. So 95% of the time when you get a blood test, you'll have a sodium quote in the normal range. Your doctor's not going to tell you anything about it. It's going to be on your blood test. You can look at it. Sodium is Na. That's the periodic table for the label for it. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be normal. But what the group from the Aging Institute found was that if your serum sodium is in the upper end of the normal range, that's still a risk factor. That's a risk factor for aging, dementia. So like a serum sodium of 142 to 143, 144, these are considered, quote, normal. If you have that, you are not drinking enough water, and it is increasing your risk for a lot of complications. And then we started doing it. We found that as a normal but high on the high end of serum sodium, it increases your risk for kidney disease. We found that it increases your risk for high blood pressure, dementia, all those things. It's been shown. So ask your doctor what your serum sodium is. It's not good enough to be in the normal range. You want to be in the mid to low normal range. You don't want it to be low, okay? You don't want it to be low. And actually on the lowest of the normal range, some people say it's like 135, is better to be, the best numbers are like 138 to 141. If you're in that range, 138 to 140, 141, you are good. 137, good. Those are good. 144, Drink more water.
And I think you would agree that most Americans need to drink more water.
Yes.
Most of us are dehydrated.
Yes.
Question, interesting. We all know that neurodegenerative disease is on the rise. Everybody's talking about Alzheimer's, sixth leading cause of death. Mitochondria, major component, major leading contender for neurodegenerative disease. Fructose damages mitochondria. What's fructose play effect, obviously adverse effect, on the brain and neurodegenerative disease?
I think it is the number one cause of Alzheimer's. And here's my evidence. Okay. I know that's a very strong statement, but here's the evidence. You know, if you give sugar containing fructose to a laboratory rat, they will develop problems thinking. They have trouble going through a maze. They have cognitive problems, and you can induce that fairly quickly. And that's associated with changes in the brain that are associated with early Alzheimer's. The mitochondria get sick, the brain becomes insulin resistant, which is a characteristic of early Alzheimer's. ATP levels fall, that's associated with early Alzheimer's. And over time, if you keep giving them sugar, they start developing amyloid plaques in their brain. And that is what we typically call Alzheimer's. So you can show it in the animal. Now, in the person, the main risk factors for Alzheimer's are sugar intake, high glycemic carb intake. These are like major risk factors. High salt diet's been associated with it. Being obese, being diabetic. It's the same risk factors associated with fructose, okay? And then if you look in the brain of Alzheimer's patients, fructose levels are 5 to 6-fold higher. And there's evidence that the brain is making fructose. And so that's very strong evidence. And then here's probably one of the strongest bits of evidence. If you give fructose to an animal, they get hungry, but they also forage. They start foraging for food. And when they foraging for food, it's an actual behavior. They have to get impulsive. They have to move around fast. They can't stay in any one place for a very long time. They have to keep looking for food. So it's a behavioral response, and they have to be brave, and they can't have a lot of self-control because they've got to be able to go into dangerous areas in order to find that food. And what's been shown is that foraging behavior requires to reduce the blood supply to areas of the brain involved in self-control and memory, and so that it can allow you to find that food quickly and rapidly. And it turns out that when it reduces the blood supply, it does it by reducing the blood supply and reducing the sugar delivery and by reducing the energy production. So it's doing all those things that fructose is supposed to do as a survival mechanism. It's doing it to stimulate foraging, but these are the things that basically are starving the brain because they're reducing the glucose delivery and the production of ATP. So it's causing the ATP levels to fall in those areas of the brain, which help foraging in a short term, but chronically is really probably what's driving Alzheimer's. So I believe that this is probably the biggest discovery of the fructose survival hypothesis, is the evidence that it's probably playing a role in Alzheimer's. And I did write a paper on this with David Perlmutter and also with Dale Bredesen, who's an expert on Alzheimer's, as well as other neurologists. So the evidence is pretty significant.
So fructose sugar is dirty fuel. Fat, since you mentioned Bredesen and Perlmutter and yourself, is clean fuel. So now everybody's saying, what do I do? So they switch to artificial sweeteners, which we know is deleterious to one's overall health, bad for the blood-brain barrier, bad for leaky gut. Average American consumes 146 pounds of artificial sweeteners. What options do they have other than an artificial sweetener that's healthy and still tastes good?
There are some natural sugars that are low calorie that do not seem to have all the problems of a lot of the artificial sugars. And I was approached about 6 months ago by a group that had this sugar called Allulose. And allulose is a true natural sugar. It looks like fructose, but it's slightly different, and it does not activate the biologic switch. And we've done studies to look at this, as have others. And so it seems to be a safer sugar because it's natural, low calorie, low carb. And so this group, when they approached me, they asked me if I might join them as a scientific officer and try to look at the safety and all that of the sugar. And so far, it looks pretty safe. It looks safe. And what's interesting is it tends to stimulate the same hormone that Ozempic and these other drugs do. It's called GLP-1. And there's some studies that actually show that when you give this allulose, you tend to lower blood sugar, especially after a meal, and you stimulate this hormone that's associated with weight loss. So there's actually data that unlike other artificial sugars that are neutral or negative, this one tends to have positive metabolic effects. It tends to be good. And the clinical studies tend to show weight loss, improved metabolic parameters. And my dream is to do a large clinical study to see if this allulose can, a lot of people go on Ozempic and they lose weight, but when they stop the Ozempic, they gain all their weight back.
Yeah.
And I would like to do a study where we transition some of them to allulose to see if we can block that weight regain. And that would be another benefit in addition to all the things we should be doing that we've talked about, like low carb, drinking more water, drinking more coffee, taking omega-3. Omega-3s are really beneficial, a type of fat. Anyway, so I would like to do that. But a disclosure, I am now affiliated with this company, but I joined the company because my science was telling me that this is probably a safe and beneficial sugar.
So to piggyback on what you said, allulose is not an artificial sweetener and additive. It's a natural plant-based certified rare sugar. The FDA looked at it and said that allulose was healthy. So in 2019, they stopped requiring brands to include it on nutritional facts panel.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, allulose is clinically evidenced to lower insulin and blood glucose.
Yep.
So allulose may be the new girl with the curl, if you will.
Yeah, I think so. Exactly right. It's considered generally regarded as safe. It's people are taking it all over the world. It's present in grocery stores, and there's cereals that have it, and it looks good. I want to be. I'm a scientist, and so I would like to do a big clinical trial. But all the data looks like it's good, and I've joined the company because I believe in it. But yeah, I want to do that big study and see if I can help people who are trying to get off Ozempic. That would be my goal.
If we talked about Ozempic, we'd be here for a couple of days, and they probably cut and shut us down. The company that we're talking about happens to be RX Sugar. It'll be in the show notes.
Yep.
This has been great. I mean, you said we could talk fructose from now to the next millennia, and you weren't kidding. This has been fabulous.
You're welcome.
Can you give me like just to recap, 5 points that everybody would want to implement tomorrow based on the science that you've talked about?
Yes. So the first thing is read labels and look for things that say high fructose corn syrup or table sugar like sucrose. You want to avoid eating foods high in high fructose corn syrup and table sugar. Your number one are soft drinks, but power drinks, sugar is added to coffee and anything where they're adding these sweeteners. If you go to a Japanese restaurant, you order teriyaki, that's filled with sugar, and you go to a Chinese restaurant and a lot of times they add syrups and so forth, sugar to their food. So reduce your sugar and high fructose corn syrup intake. The second thing is to reduce high glycemic carbs, starchy foods like bread, rice, potatoes, especially if it's salted. They are also play a role in making fructose. They're used to help make fructose. So a low fructose diet, a low carb diet is a good way to go. A third thing is what we're learning is that how important hydration is, and drink 8 glasses of water a day. If your urine is dark yellow, you need to drink more water because, you may have to drink more if you're working outside in the heat. So look at your urine. You want it to be almost clear. You don't want it to be completely clear, but just a slight yellow tinge is the right amount. Okay. Check your serum sodium is another little part of that. You want your serum sodium to be like 138 to 141 or so. And another thing to do is, to know that things like vitamin C is beneficial, 500 milligrams to a gram a day. Coffee's good. Drink, if you like coffee, drink a couple cups a day. Alcohol really isn't that good. Try to limit it to, if you do like alcohol, try to limit how much you drink, and especially wine's probably a little bit better than beer because of the high purine content. And hard liquor is probably bad no matter what, because it really gets converted to, it really generates the uric acid, and usually it's mixed with sugar, So, omega-3 turns out to be a wonderful fat that neutralizes fructose as well. And especially in the brain, I would recommend an omega-3 supplement, or eat salmon or foods that have a lot of omega-3, walnuts. So how's that?
I love it. Something implementable that they can do tomorrow. Everybody, Dr. J said you can eat fruits, just don't eat too many at one time.
Right.
Be choosy, trying to eat the high sugary foods, eat the lower sugary foods, glycemic index
Right.
35 or less. Could we go?
Yeah, I think that's a good one.
Outstanding, because as we said before, fructose may be the nexus for a lot of America's healthcare problems today.
Thank you, Bob.
So just before we leave, I'd love to ask you, how can everybody get in touch with you?
Yes, so drrichardjohnson.com is my website. And also I have an Instagram, Dr. Richard J. Johnson. And also, I have a book that you can get through almost any of the bookstores or Amazon. And that's called Nature Wants Us to Be Fat. And so, yes, there's ways you can reach me.
Fabulous. It's been my pleasure. It's been an illuminating experience for me. I hope to see you again for part 2. Dr. Richard Johnson, thank you so very much. Proven Health Alternatives, Rob Silverman, always yours in health.